Rain had a way of making the world feel quieter than it really was. The windshield wipers swept back and forth with steady determination, cutting through the silver curtain that covered the empty highway. Headlights stretched across the wet pavement, reflecting like broken ribbons of light. Beyond the road, tall pine trees disappeared into the growing darkness, their outlines softened by the storm. Cold water soaked through my jacket almost immediately. The stranger looked surprised as I walked toward him. "You okay?" I asked. He blinked, almost as though he hadn't expected anyone to actually speak. "I think the truck finally decided it had enough of me," he said with a tired smile. His voice was calm, gentle, the kind of voice that didn't rush to fill silence. I looked under the hood for a moment before shaking my head. "I'm better with paperwork than engines." A quiet laugh escaped him. "That makes two of us." For the first time I noticed his eyes. They were a warm shade of green, tired around the edges but strangely kind. Rainwater dripped from his dark hair onto his forehead. "You need a ride?" I asked. He hesitated. "I don't like asking." "You didn't." Another small smile appeared. "My name's Grayson. I'm Rowan." We shook hands briefly before climbing into my truck. Warm air slowly replaced the cold. Neither of us spoke for the first minute. The windshield wipers kept their steady rhythm. Finally, I cleared my throat. "So, where are you headed?" "The Maple Crest Motel." I nodded. "Not exactly a vacation destination." "No," he admitted softly. "Just somewhere to sleep." His answer sounded complete. Yet something about it also felt unfinished. I didn't press him. Experience had taught me that people carried stories they weren't always ready to tell. The road stretched quietly ahead of us. Grayson stared out the passenger window. Every now and then, his phone lit up. The screen flashed with incoming calls. He looked at it only long enough to silence it. Then he turned the phone completely off. I pretended not to notice. After several more miles, he spoke again. "You drive this road often?" "Almost every day." "Does it always rain this much?" "Only when the universe feels dramatic." That earned a genuine laugh. It was warm. Honest. For reasons I couldn't explain, hearing it made the truck feel less empty. We talked about simple things after that. The old diner near town. How impossible it was to predict weather in the mountains. The strange comfort of roadside coffee that somehow tasted terrible every single time. Nothing important. Yet somehow everything felt important. Conversation never struggled. Neither did silence. Some people made quiet feel uncomfortable. Grayson didn't. His silence felt peaceful, like sitting beside a lake without needing to speak. As the motel sign appeared through the rain, he let out a slow breath. "That's me." I parked beneath the flickering lights. The building looked older than I remembered. Paint peeled from the walls. Only a few windows glowed against the dark evening. Grayson reached for the door before stopping. He turned toward me. "Rowan?" "Yeah. Thank you." His voice was barely above the sound of rain. Most people didn't stop. For a moment, neither of us moved. There was something unexpectedly heavy inside those words. Not dramatic. Not desperate. Simply true. I shrugged gently. It would have felt wrong not to. He smiled again. This time the smile reached his eyes. "I hope life gives you that kindness back someday." Before I could think of an answer, he stepped into the rain and disappeared beneath the motel awning. I waited until he had gone inside before pulling away. The drive home felt different. The truck wasn't any quieter than before. If anything, it felt louder. His words echoed in my thoughts. Most people didn't stop. I told myself I'd probably never see him again. Small towns still had a way of letting strangers disappear. By the time I reached my house, the rain had finally begun to slow. The porch light cast a soft circle across the wet wooden steps. Inside, everything looked exactly as I'd left it. The silence returned. But somehow it didn't feel quite as familiar. I found myself wondering whether Grayson had found a warm room, whether his truck could be repaired, whether the phone calls he'd ignored would keep coming tomorrow. I didn't know why any of it mattered. He was only a stranger, just someone I'd met beside a forgotten road on a rainy evening. Still, as sleep slowly settled over the quiet house, one unexpected thought refused to leave me. Sometimes a single stop along an ordinary road felt less like an accident, and more like the beginning of a story neither person had planned to tell. 3 days passed before I saw Grayson again. I told myself I hadn't been looking for him. Still, every time I drove through town, my eyes wandered toward the Maple Crest Motel without meaning to. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if his truck had been repaired, or if he had already left for another place. Life returned to its familiar rhythm. Morning coffee. Long hours at work. Quiet evenings. Yet something felt different, as though the silence I had grown used to was waiting for someone. On Saturday morning, I stopped at Naomi's Cafe. It sat on the corner of Main Street, where flower boxes rested beneath old windows and the smell of fresh bread drifted through the air. The cafe had been there longer than anyone could remember. Naomi greeted nearly every customer by name, and even newcomers somehow left feeling less alone. The small bell above the door rang as I stepped inside. Warm light spilled across polished wooden tables. Soft music played in the background. I had barely taken 2 steps when I noticed him. Grayson sat near the window with a steaming mug between his hands. A worn paperback rested beside his plate, though he seemed more interested in watching people pass outside than reading. He looked up. For a second, surprise crossed his face. Then came that familiar, gentle smile. "Rowan, looks like your luck improved." He laughed quietly. "My truck survived. Apparently it just needed someone who actually knew what they were doing." "I'm glad." Naomi walked over with 2 menus before stopping. "You two already know each other?" "We met on the highway," Grayson answered. "Well," Naomi said with a knowing smile. "Funny how this town keeps bringing people back together." She walked away before either of us could answer. I ordered my usual breakfast. Without asking, Grayson invited me to sit across from him. There was no awkwardness this time. Conversation flowed as naturally as the coffee Naomi continued pouring into our cups. I learned that Grayson had recently moved to town. He had rented a small apartment only a few streets from the cafe. "What brought you here?" I asked. He traced one finger around the rim of his mug before answering. "I needed somewhere quiet." There was something final about those words. Not cold, just careful. I recognized that kind of answer. It was the sort people gave when the truth still hurt too much to explain. So I simply nodded. "I understand." His eyes met mine for a brief moment. "I think you do." After that morning, we began seeing each other in unexpected places. At the bookstore downtown, near the grocery store, walking the trail beside the lake. Sometimes we planned to meet. Sometimes we didn't. Either way, our conversations always seemed to continue exactly where they had ended. Days slowly became weeks. Without realizing it, I began looking forward to those meetings. Grayson noticed little things. He remembered how I preferred black coffee. He knew I always paused to admire old bookstores. He remembered that thunderstorms never bothered me, but fireworks did. No one had paid attention like that in a very long time. One afternoon, we wandered through the local farmers market. The sidewalks buzzed with quiet conversations. Children laughed near handmade craft stalls. Someone played an old guitar beneath a maple tree. Grayson stopped beside a stand filled with fresh apples. "They remind me of my grandmother." "She liked apples?" He smiled softly. "She baked pies every Sunday." "You must miss her." "I do." There was sadness in his voice. Not overwhelming sadness. The kind that settles gently into someone's heart after enough years have passed. I wanted to ask more. Instead, I simply stood beside him. Sometimes silence carried more kindness than questions. As autumn slowly painted the trees gold, we found ourselves spending an evening beside Willow Lake. The water reflected the fading sunset. Gentle waves touched the wooden dock beneath our feet. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, Grayson broke the silence. "Do you ever feel like you're starting over?" I thought about Declan, about the apartment we once shared, about promises that disappeared almost overnight. "Every day," I admitted. He nodded slowly. "I left behind almost everything." His voice barely rose above the wind. "Friends." He paused. "People I thought would always be there." I looked toward the lake. "What happened?" Another long silence followed. Then he answered with only one sentence. Sometimes leaving is the only way to survive. The words settled between us. Simple, quiet, painfully honest. I didn't know exactly what he meant, but somehow, I understood anyway. Our friendship continued growing through ordinary moments. I helped him carry boxes into his apartment. He helped me repair the loose steps on my front porch. He brought coffee to my office one rainy afternoon simply because he happened to be nearby. I knew he had walked nearly 20 minutes just to surprise me. I never told him that. Instead, I smiled more than I had in years. Even Mason noticed. "You've been happier lately," my longtime friend said one evening. "Have I?" "You laugh again." His words caught me off guard. I hadn't realized how rarely I used to laugh. One chilly evening, Grayson invited me to watch the first stars appear above the lake. We sat wrapped in jackets while cool air drifted across the water. "You know," he said quietly, "when you stopped that night." He hesitated. I didn't expect kindness anymore. I looked down at the wooden dock. I almost kept driving. His eyebrows lifted. "Really?" I told myself it wasn't my problem. "What changed?" I smiled faintly. "I don't know. Maybe it had been the way he stood alone without asking anyone for help. Maybe it had been the loneliness I recognized because I carried it myself. Or maybe some roads quietly lead people toward each other before either of them understands why." Grayson looked out across the dark water. "I'm glad you stopped." "So am I." The answer escaped before I could think about it. He turned toward me. For a brief moment, neither of us looked away. No confession followed. No dramatic music. Only the peaceful sound of water touching the shore. Yet something had shifted. Not into romance. Not yet. Into trust. The kind built slowly, one conversation at a time. The kind that asked for nothing except honesty. As we walked back toward our cars beneath a sky full of stars, I realized something that both comforted and frightened me. Every morning had started feeling a little brighter because I believed there was a chance I might see Grayson. And somewhere deep inside a heart that had spent years protecting itself, hope was beginning to return. By the middle of October, the trees had turned brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The mornings arrived wrapped in cool mist, and the afternoons carried the comforting smell of fallen leaves. The town slowed with the season, as though everyone wanted to hold on to autumn for just a little longer. For the first time in years, I wasn't simply surviving. I was living. Grayson had become part of my everyday routine without either of us planning it. Some mornings we shared coffee before work. Other evenings we walked along Willow Lake, talking about books, childhood memories, or nothing important at all. There was still no label for whatever existed between us. We never reached for words that felt too heavy. Yet every quiet smile, every thoughtful glance, and every lingering goodbye carried feelings that neither of us was ready to name. It felt safe. Until the past found me again. I saw Declan on a Tuesday afternoon. I had stopped at the hardware store to pick up supplies for repairing my porch before winter arrived. As I turned into the next aisle, someone quietly spoke my name. "Rowan." The sound froze me where I stood. I turned slowly. There he was. Declan looked older than I remembered. A few silver strands had appeared near his temples, and the confidence he once carried so easily had been replaced by something quieter. Regret. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. "I didn't know you still lived here," he finally said. "I do. I've wanted to talk to you." "I haven't." My answer came more sharply than I intended. He lowered his eyes. "I deserve that." Silence settled between us. "I know saying I'm sorry isn't enough," he continued. "But I am sorry." The words should have meant something. Years ago, I had imagined hearing them 1,000 different ways. Now they only felt late. "You didn't just leave," I said quietly. "You made me believe I wasn't enough." Declan's face tightened with guilt. "I know." "No." I shook my head. "You know what happened. You don't know what it became." Without waiting for another reply, I walked away. My hands trembled all the way to the parking lot. Some wounds never truly disappeared. They simply learned how to stay quiet until someone reopened them. That evening, Grayson immediately noticed something was wrong. "You've been somewhere else all day," he said as we sat outside Naomi's cafe. "I'm just tired." He studied me carefully. I don't think that's it. I wanted to tell him. I almost did. But speaking Declan's name aloud felt like reopening a door I had spent years trying to close. So I smiled. A weak, unconvincing smile. I'm okay. Grayson nodded politely, but his eyes told me he knew I wasn't. Over the next week, little things began changing. Mason suddenly became strangely secretive. Whenever I visited his workshop, he seemed distracted. One afternoon, I walked inside without knocking. He quickly slipped his phone into his pocket. "You startled me," he laughed. "Sorry. It's nothing." Maybe it wasn't. Still, something felt different. The feeling grew stronger 2 days later when I saw Mason and Grayson talking outside the grocery store. They stood close together, speaking quietly. The moment they noticed me, the conversation ended. Grayson smiled. "Hey!" Mason looked unusually uncomfortable. "We were just..." His sentence faded away. "Just talking," Grayson finished. I nodded. "Looks like it." Neither of them explained further. I told myself they didn't owe me an explanation. Friends were allowed to have conversations. Even so, an old, familiar uneasiness settled inside my chest. The days that followed became filled with tiny moments that my anxious mind refused to ignore. Grayson checked his phone more often. Sometimes he stepped outside to answer calls. Other times he simply looked thoughtful before changing the subject whenever I asked what was bothering him. He wasn't acting cold. If anything, he seemed more concerned about me than ever. But secrets had a way of growing louder inside someone who had already survived betrayal. Every unanswered question reminded me of the life I once had with Declan. Back then, the changes had started small too. Late-night phone calls, unexpected meetings, half-finished explanations. I hated myself for making comparisons. Yet I couldn't stop. One rainy afternoon, I decided to surprise Grayson with lunch. Naomi packed 2 sandwiches and smiled knowingly as she handed me the bag. "Tell him not to work too hard." "I will." His apartment was only a few blocks away. When I reached the building, I noticed his car wasn't there. I called once. No answer. Then I remembered he had mentioned needing to stop by an office downtown. Without thinking much about it, I drove there. As I parked across the street, I looked toward the entrance. My breath caught. Grayson stepped out of the building. Declan walked beside him. They weren't arguing. They weren't smiling either. They simply stood together, speaking quietly. Declan handed him a folder. Then they shook hands. My heart sank. It wasn't the handshake itself. It was the memory it awakened. Years earlier, I had stood outside another building and watched Declan laugh with someone else while I waited inside a coffee shop, believing I still mattered. The feeling returned all at once. Sharp, cold, merciless. Without realizing it, I dropped the bag containing our lunch onto the passenger seat. I started the engine. I drove away before either of them saw me. That evening my phone buzzed. "Grayson, hey, I stopped by your house. Everything okay?" I stared at the screen. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, another message appeared. Did I do something wrong? I locked my phone. The following morning came another. "Please talk to me." Then another. "I'm worried about you." Every message made answering harder. Because if I replied, I would have to ask questions I wasn't ready to hear answered. And if the answers confirmed my fears, I wasn't sure my heart could survive another betrayal. The town suddenly felt much colder. The places that had once brought comfort now reminded me of Grayson. The bookstore, the lake, Naomi's cafe. Every memory hurt. Naomi watched me push untouched coffee around my cup one morning. "You've gone quiet again," she said gently. "I've been quiet before. Not like this." I looked toward the window where rain slid slowly down the glass. What if trusting someone was a mistake? Naomi didn't answer immediately. Instead, she folded her hands around her mug. "The hardest part about trust," she finally whispered, "is that fear always speaks before truth has the chance." I wanted to believe her. I truly did. But fear had already become louder than anything else. As another message from Grayson lit up my silent phone, I turned the screen face down. Outside, the rain began to fall once more. And for the second time in my life, I found myself walking away from someone I cared about. Before giving them the chance to explain. 2 weeks passed. The town kept moving as though nothing had changed. The leaves continued falling. Morning frost settled across the sidewalks. The first hints of winter appeared in the quiet hills surrounding Willow Lake. Yet my world had become painfully still. Every morning, I reached for my phone without thinking. Every morning, I found another message from Grayson. They grew shorter with time. I hope you're okay. I'm still here if you want to talk. Please don't disappear like this. Then the messages stopped. The silence that followed hurt even more. It wasn't the peaceful silence we had once shared beside the lake. This one felt heavy, final. I buried myself in work, convinced that staying busy would quiet my thoughts. Didn't. Every familiar place carried a memory. The cafe where we'd first laughed together. The bookstore where he'd insisted I borrow his favorite novel. The dock where he'd quietly admitted that sometimes leaving was the only way to survive. I had spent years building walls around my heart. Now I realized I had trapped myself behind them again. Naomi noticed before I said a word. One cold afternoon, she placed a slice of warm apple pie in front of me. I didn't order this. I know. She sat across from me. You've been punishing yourself. I don't know what you're talking about. She smiled gently. Rowan. I've been watching people walk through that door for nearly 40 years. She nodded toward the empty chair across from mine. Some lose people because life is unfair. Then she looked back at me. And some lose people because fear convinces them to stop listening. I stared at my untouched coffee. What if I wasn't wrong? Then you'll have your answer. She paused. But what if you were? Her question settled deep inside me. For the first time in days, I wondered whether I had been protecting my heart, or simply repeating the same mistake that heartbreak had taught me to make. That evening, I stood outside Grayson's apartment. The hallway felt strangely familiar. The same hallway where I had once helped him carry boxes after he moved into town. My hand hovered above the door. Before I could knock, it opened. Grayson stood there. He looked thinner. The tired circles beneath his eyes hadn't been there before. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he stepped aside. You came. I almost didn't. I know. His apartment remained as simple as ever. Books lined one shelf. A half-finished puzzle covered the dining table. The room felt warm. Yet the distance between us felt enormous. I struggled to find the right words. Instead, the wrong ones escaped first. I saw you with Declan. Grayson closed his eyes briefly. I was hoping you'd tell me that. You lied to me. No. He met my gaze. I stayed silent. What's the difference? The difference, he answered quietly, is that silence can come from fear, not betrayal. He disappeared into the bedroom for a moment before returning with a plain brown folder. He placed it carefully on the table. This is why I met him. I looked down without opening it. I don't understand. He contacted me the week after you introduced me to Naomi. My chest tightened. He knew who I was. I looked up sharply. How? He saw us together. Grayson's voice remained calm, though pain lingered beneath every word. He asked to meet because he wanted to warn me. I swallowed hard. Warn you about what? Grayson let out a slow breath. He told me you were unstable. The room became painfully quiet. He said you'd become attached to anyone who showed you kindness. My hands slowly curled into fists. He told me your loneliness would eventually destroy anyone who got close to you. I couldn't speak. Grayson continued. He said leaving early would hurt you less than staying. A tear slipped down his cheek before he wiped it away. I almost believed him. The words struck harder than I expected. You believed him? For one night. He nodded. Then I remembered every conversation we'd ever had. He smiled sadly. The man I met on that rainy road wasn't the man Declan described. I finally opened the folder. Inside were printed emails. Messages from Declan. Each one asked Grayson to end our friendship. One sentence stood out more than the others. You'll regret staying close to Rowan. My vision blurred. I had no idea. I know. Grayson sat across from me. I met him again because I wanted him to stop. You shook his hand. I shook his hand after telling him never to contact me again. Everything I had imagined, everything fear had convinced me was true, collapsed in an instant. I should have told you, Grayson whispered. I thought I could protect you from reopening old wounds. He lowered his eyes. I was wrong. I looked at the floor for several long seconds. Then another question surfaced. The night I found you. You've always wondered why I was really standing there. I nodded. Grayson folded his hands together. I wasn't running from danger. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I was leaving someone who controlled every part of my life. He stared toward the window. He decided who I could see, what I could wear, where I could go. When I finally left, I took only what fit inside that truck. The room filled with silence. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that forms when pain finally has permission to exist. I wasn't brave, he said. I was terrified. You stopped your truck anyway. His eyes met mine. And for the first time in years, someone asked if I was okay without expecting anything in return. A knock interrupted the quiet. Mason stepped into the apartment after Grayson opened the door. The moment he saw me, guilt covered his face. I owe you both an apology. Neither of us answered. I knew Declan contacted Grayson. My stomach tightened. I wanted to tell you. What stopped you? I asked. He looked away. My business was already struggling. He threatened to ruin the contracts I'd spent years building. I convinced myself staying quiet would protect everyone. His voice cracked. It only made everything worse. The room fell silent again. No one tried to defend what had happened. Some mistakes simply couldn't be explained away. After Mason quietly left, only Grayson and I remained. Night had settled outside. Snowflakes drifted gently beyond the window. I was afraid, I admitted. Grayson nodded. I know. I saw you with him. I know. I didn't even give you the chance to explain. His eyes softened. No, you didn't. The truth hurt, because it was true. I took one slow step closer. I was afraid of losing you. My voice trembled. Before I even admitted how much I needed you. Grayson stood in silence for a moment. Then he smiled through tears. You never lost me, Rowan. The space between us finally disappeared. Without another word, we embraced. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't perfect. It was simply two wounded hearts choosing, at last, to believe each other instead of their fears. Outside, the first snowfall of the season covered the town in quiet white. Inside, something even gentler began to heal. Winter arrived quietly. Snow covered the rooftops, softened the empty streets, and settled gently across Willow Lake. The town seemed to breathe more slowly beneath the pale morning sky, as though the world itself understood that healing could not be rushed. Neither could we. After our conversation at Grayson's apartment, nothing changed overnight. There were no dramatic promises, no grand declarations, no impossible expectations. Instead, there were small choices, every single day. I answered his messages. He stopped by the house after work. Sometimes we shared dinner. Sometimes we simply sat together in comfortable silence, watching snowflakes drift past the windows. The quiet no longer felt lonely, felt shared. For the first time in years, home felt warm again. One Saturday morning, Grayson arrived carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. I figured you'd still be asleep, he said with a smile. I was. I know. You bought coffee anyway? He lifted one shoulder. I was hoping. I laughed. The sound surprised both of us. You laugh more now, he said softly. I think it's your fault. I'll accept the blame. We stood on the porch drinking coffee while the town slowly woke around us. Nothing extraordinary happened. Yet I couldn't remember the last time an ordinary morning had made me this happy. As winter continued, we spent more time helping Naomi at the cafe. She insisted she didn't need the extra hands. Then she happily accepted every bit of help we offered. Grayson repaired an old bookshelf that had leaned crookedly for years. I painted the front fence before another snowfall arrived. One afternoon, Naomi watched us from behind the counter with a knowing smile. What? I asked. She chuckled. You two still don't realize you're taking care of each other. Grayson looked at me. I looked back at him. Neither of us argued with her. Because she was right. Healing wasn't something either of us had accomplished alone. It happened one quiet day after another. December brought the town's annual winter festival. Children built snowmen in the park. Families carried cups of hot chocolate through the decorated streets. Small lights wrapped around every tree, filling the evening with a soft golden glow. Grayson and I wandered through the crowd without much of a plan. At one stall, an elderly couple sold handmade scarves. The woman smiled as we admired them. This blue one would suit him, she said, pointing toward me. Grayson picked it up. I think she's right. You don't have to. I know. Before I could finish, he bought it anyway. Later, while we stood watching children skate across the frozen pond, he wrapped the scarf around my neck himself. His hands lingered for only a second. But that brief moment carried more tenderness than words ever could. A few days before Christmas, Mason knocked on my door. He looked nervous. I wasn't sure you'd answer. I almost didn't. I know. For several moments we simply stood there. I don't expect forgiveness, he said quietly. I just wanted you to know I've spent every day wishing I'd found the courage to tell you the truth. I believed him. Regret had changed him. The silence between us felt different from before. Not empty. Honest. I can't pretend nothing happened, I finally said. You shouldn't. But maybe. I paused. Maybe people deserve the chance to become better than their worst mistake. His eyes filled with relief. Thank you. Trust would take time. Perhaps years. But every journey toward healing had to begin somewhere. Christmas morning arrived wrapped in fresh snow. I expected to spend the day alone. Instead, someone knocked on my front door. Grayson stood outside holding a small box tied with a green ribbon. I hope I'm not too early. You could never be. Inside the box rested an old compass. Its brass surface showed years of careful use. It belonged to my grandfather, Grayson explained. He always said a compass isn't valuable because it knows every destination. He smiled gently. It's valuable because it helps people find their way when they're lost. I looked at the compass resting in my hands. You want me to keep this? I do. So do I. I looked across the lake. If I'd driven past you that night. I've thought about that too. I almost did. I know. I turned toward him. Stopping that night. I took a slow breath. Was the best decision I've ever made. For a moment, Grayson simply watched the sunlight dancing across the water. Then he looked back at me. You didn't rescue me, Rowan. His smile was warm, gentle, honest. We rescued each other. The words carried no uncertainty, no fear, only truth. I felt tears gather in my eyes. So, I laughed softly. I guess there's something I've been trying to say for a while. I know. You do. I've known for months. I smiled. I love you. Grayson stepped closer. So do I. I think. He laughed quietly. I've loved you since the day you stopped on that rainy road. Emotion caught in my throat. There was nothing left to hide. No walls. No misunderstandings. Only two hearts that had learned trust could exist again. We wrapped our arms around each other as the evening breeze drifted across the lake. Unhurried. Exactly like the story that had brought us there. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't see before. Healing isn't forgetting the people who hurt us. It's refusing to let that hurt decide who we're allowed to become. Betrayal taught me to expect people to leave. Love taught me that some people choose to stay. Grayson didn't erase my past. He helped me believe that my future didn't have to look the same. Sometimes the people who change your life aren't waiting at the finish line. Sometimes they're standing alone beside a forgotten road, hoping that one person will stop. If that rainy evening taught me anything, it's this. The smallest act of kindness can become the first page of a story that changes two lives forever. And sometimes, after every disappointment, every broken promise, and every lonely mile, love still finds its way home. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments. Have you ever met someone who changed your life when you least expected it? Your story might give hope to someone who needs it today. Did you like this feature?